of May was Ego Awareness Day, and I thought I'll do this video just to be able to explain a simple exercise which will help us to do some ego work. But before we go into this short little exercise, let us first talk about what ego is. Ego is known to be described as a self-absorbed personality, an inflated self-image, and this causes a lot of negative traits such as being selfish, neurotic, overly, extremely ambitious, competitive, to the detriment of others, a high level of arrogance, vanity, pride, and a sense of excessive superiority or inferiority. So basically it's an unbalanced personality, one could say. So on this day, the reason why this ego awareness day was created a couple of years ago was just to create this understanding of what the ego is and what we can actually do to be able to increase our well-being. Research has shown that when we are influenced by the effects of the unobserved egocentric mind, then this can be the reason why we go through mental difficulties and challenges. So by doing this simple exercise, it will just help us come back to our center, be able to be anchored. So first of all, what we need to do is to introduce ourselves to our ego. So most probably a lot of you hearing this video may not even be aware of your ego, because we're unconscious that ego is running the show at this level of consciousness. So if we are able to introduce ourselves to this state, it'll help us be detached when we are in imbalance. So just take some time in a quiet place, and after taking a few deep breaths, just try and see this self-centered part of your personality as something separate from you. Once you've done this, it's about building a relationship with this separate sense of identity that we have. And the key is just to be aware. Just to be aware that there may be a certain part of ourselves that creates this urgency to react, to engage in certain negative chain of reactions, which if we are slower and we are more mindful, then we can respond rather than react. So the key is here building this relationship with this so-called created sense of identity. So we can do this in another simple way, which is to name our ego. And the key is not to name our ego with our own name, but keep it separate. So whatever you prefer, just name your ego. So it helps to be able to create this distinguish between your true higher self, your higher mind, and this egocentric, negative state, which is known as the ego. And naming The ego helps to be able to differentiate between yourself and the negative state. And then identify. So once we have named the ego, it's important to understand when the ego is triggered. So what are we feeling when we are experiencing discomfort? What is the emotion when we are triggered? Is it anger? Is it pride? What is it? Just so that we are able to understand that there's certain situations in our life that trigger this egocentric part of ourselves. And once we're able to do this, the key is to acknowledge. So acknowledging the ego is validating it, so understanding that it does exist, but at the same time, the important part is to differentiate between you and your ego, to understand they are two separate parts of our true self. And if we are able to create this distinguish and this relationship, then we'll be able to understand the triggers that are causing us to get into this negative state. And rather than reacting, we can choose to respond.